Coming up this hour, we dive into the top stories of the day, including a state bill that could end child marriages in Texas and nullify all existing marriage license involving minors. I'm Ernie Manous.
And I'm Celeste Diaz-Sherman. Should the 10 Commandments be in every public school classroom? We'll discuss with State Representative James Talarico.
And I'm Frank Billingsley. Plus, the directors of many murals, Elia and Noah Quiles, talk about their award-winning civic art program that transforms traffic signal control boxes into vibrant works of art.
And as Ernie, Frank, and I discuss the top headlines of the day, we want your thoughts, your questions, and your concerns. Give us a call or shoot us a text at 713-440-8870 or email us at talk@hellohouston.org.
Hello Houston is made possible in part by founding sponsors John Bradshaw and Kathy Sanders, and by gifts from listeners like you.
Live from NPR News, I'm Lakshmi Singh. Hamas has released U.S. Israeli hostage Idan Alexander, according to a statement by Hamas and an Israeli official who spoke to NPR on condition of anonymity because the official was not authorized to speak publicly. NPR's Hadil Al-Shalchi has details.
Israeli-American hostage Idan Alexander was released as part of what Hamas said was a step toward reaching a ceasefire agreement with Israel. Alexander is a 21-year-old Israeli soldier raised in New Jersey and believed to be the last remaining U.S. citizen captured by Hamas on October 7, 2023, and held in Gaza. Hamas said the release would come as part of a ceasefire effort to open Gaza's border crossings and bring aid to Gaza. Israel said it had not agreed to a ceasefire. A statement from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office said that Alexander's return, quote, without anything in return, is thanks to President Trump's diplomacy. Hadil Al-Shalchi, NPR News, Tel Aviv.
In Washington, President Trump welcomed Alexander's release.
Idan's the only American citizen who's captured and held hostage by Hamas since October 7th, 2023. And he's coming home to his parents.
Trump is en route to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates on his first major overseas trip since he took office. The U.S. and China have agreed to a temporary break from triple-digit tariffs, and U.S. stocks are trading higher. Here's NPR's Scott Horsley.
The U.S. is slashing tariffs on imports from China from 145% to 30% for the next 90 days. In exchange, China is temporarily cutting its tax on imports from the U.S. to just 10%. The move is a relief for many businesses that rely on Chinese imports. The earlier triple-digit tax had brought much of the cargo traffic between the two countries to a standstill. The remaining tariffs are still significantly higher than Americans were used to paying, however, and because the tariff relief has an expiration date while negotiations continue, there's still considerable uncertainty over what the trade landscape will look like in 3 months. Scott Horsley, NPR News, Washington.
Dozens of white South Africans have landed in the U.S. Kate Bartlett has more from Johannesburg.
The group of Afrikaners, the descendants of mainly Dutch colonists, left Johannesburg on a U.S. government charter flight on Sunday night. They were given refugee status after President Trump signed an executive order saying the minority group faced persecution at home. The South African government firmly denies that.
There are no legal or any factual basis for the executive order sanctioning this action. None of the provisions of international law on the definition of refugees are applicable in this case.
That was Vincent Magwenya, spokesman for the presidency.
This is NPR News.
Live from News 88.7 in Houston, I'm Gabrielle Dawkins. The Texas Democratic Party will consider whether to remove the party's Fort Bend County chair at their meeting tonight. From the Fort Bend County Bureau, News 88.7's Natalie Weber says precinct chairs allege he made thousands of dollars in unauthorized purchases.
Fort Bend precinct chairs allege Fred Taylor violated the local party's bylaws and made more than $97,000 in unauthorized purchases. They've asked the statewide party to remove him from office. Former party treasurer April Jones says she resigned after Taylor refused to work with her.
It was just horrible, baffling, unprofessional, and I just could not understand it.
Taylor says some members of the party are trying to discredit him because he's looking into past financial mismanagement.
They want to do this smear game to basically try to discredit me.
Taylor was elected last year in a narrow runoff, which he won by 72 votes. From the Fort Bend County Bureau, I'm Natalie Weber, News 88.7.
Today marks the last day of this legislative session on which Texas House committees can approve House bills and House joint resolutions. Any House bills or joint resolutions still in committee after today are effectively dead. Political scientist Mark Jones of Rice University's Baker Institute says it's a day that lobbyists and many lawmakers are inclined to celebrate.
It's much easier to kill legislation than it is to pass legislation. And one of the goals of lobbyists, as well as many other interest groups in Austin, is simply to block legislation they don't like from passing. And the easiest way to do it is to keep it bottled up in committee, often with the support of the committee chair or other influential legislators.
Tuesday marks the last day the House can distribute calendars for its own bills and resolutions. It's 70 degrees on the UH campus, sunny with a high near 84. I'm Gabrielle Dawkins, News 88.7.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Progressive. Progressive Commercial Insurance protects small businesses from retailers to tradespeople. Progressive covers a variety of business needs with a range of coverages. More at progressivecommercial.com.
Live from the University of Houston, it's Hello Houston, an open forum on today's biggest stories affecting Houston and beyond. Call now, 713-440-8870, or let us know your thoughts on today's topics by emailing us at talk@hellohouston.org. Now here's your host for Hello Houston, Ernie Manous, Celeste Diaz-Sherman, and Frank Billingsley.
Hello, Houston.
We
We're
are back again.
It's Monday.
Start to the week. Does anybody here have the Monday blues?
No, I don't have the Monday
See,
blues.
This is good energy in this room.
I'm glad to be vertical.
When the bar is that low.
How was your weekend?
Weekend was great. It was Mother's Day. We got to celebrate Mother's Day. Got to celebrate my mom. The best thing was she went out with my partner Walt's mom, and they had a lovely time. Neither of them remembers it. But in the moment, they had a wonderful time. And that's what matters at this point. Celeste, how was your Mother's Day?
It was beautiful. I was down in South Texas. I had an event where I was speaking for this concert, poetry.
What could possibly go wrong?
Well, it went great.
Good.
Right. And so the whole thing was I was a narrator. So I would read poetry and then there'd be music underneath, and then they would have the accompaniment of the chorus would sing. Well, everything was going great. Then I went to turn my page, and I guess my pages got stuck together. And so I skipped a whole poem that was supposed to go to the next song. So I start reading about, and it's all about breast cancer from survivors.
Oh, no.
I start reading this beautiful poetry about being a motherless child, and it's super emotional. And I'm sitting there, and I'm like, okay, I just nailed it. And I look up, and Dan is sitting, my husband sitting, and he looks mortified. Mortified.
He knows you skipped.
And I'm looking out, and I look into the audience, and people are looking at their program, and they're looking up. Long story short, I skipped it. So the song, I skipped the poem that was supposed to be funny. So this next song, after reading this very emotional poem, was jazzy and like punchy and upbeat. And anyway, so in that moment, and within 30 seconds, I went through every emotional thing from embarrassment, shame. I wanted to cry. And then I was like, you know what? After this, I have to be really good. So after that, every single word, I was like, I am going to nail it. I one time listened to a podcast with Will Ferrell, and he was saying how on SNL, sometimes you just bomb, and you're going like, but if you're going to go down, you go down and be really good. And so I committed. And
well,
anyway,
if you would
it was
like
a great Mother's
to see
Day.
Celeste go through every emotion, you can watch us on YouTube. It's easy enough to do. Go to the YouTube channel, look for the Houston Public Media channel, and we're right there. Or just go to our website, hellohouston.org. Click that orange bar, and it'll connect you right through. There's always a chat group going on YouTube. We invite you to be part of that. We monitor it and invite that in. Like, subscribe, and hit that bell. Hit the bell.
Ring the bell.
Ring the bell.
We invite that in.
Yes. Also, you can email us, talk@hellohouston.org, or join the conversation through calling or texting 713-440-8870. This hour, we're going to be looking at those mini murals that are all around town on the traffic signal boxes. We'll find out about those. We're going to also talk with Representative Talarico from the Texas State House about church and state, the separation there, and even the posting of the Ten Commandments.
Yeah.
But, you know, the weather has been nice.
Let there be heat.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's beautiful today. It was an amazing weekend for Mother's Day.
It was beautiful.
As we know, it was really beautiful. I was at Art Walk at Galveston. It was great.
I was at the home tour in Galveston.
It was great, too.
Oh, you went to the home tour.
Yeah, it was fun. So, but now the high pressure, there was a low pressure in Louisiana giving us a nice north wind. That's why it was so lovely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that low's moving off toward Washington, D.C. And in its wake, high pressure is going to build. We're going to get a southwest wind. That's a hot, dry wind for us. It'll be 97 degrees by Wednesday.
I like the dry wind, but
it's going to be dry, but because once we get to the weekend, the high will have shifted, so we get to hot and humid. Until then, it's just hot and dry, but it's going to be hot. So get ready. And you know, we haven't had extreme heat in a while, so we'll probably talk maybe tomorrow about heat safety, because we need to remind folks to just be careful.
Frank, does this now mean that we are in summer?
Yep.
And we can say goodbye to our cold fronts coming in?
Yep.
Rain?
Yeah.
You said, though, no rain for a while.
I have no rain in the forecast for the rest of this week and even into next week.
Oh, that's good.
So
no,
we
it's
can
not. No rain.
Not if you're a plant.
We can put our sweaters away. We can get done.
Celeste.
Okay.
Put them away.
Really, you got your sweaters still out?
I'm cold.
Put them away.
All right. So
and own your failure.
Enough about us. Let's get into the news of the day. Celeste, start us off.
Yes, not a laughing matter. Child marriages in Texas could end this year.
No.
As state lawmakers debate a proposal that would close a loophole from a 2017 law that allows certain 16 and 17-year-olds to wed. House Bill 168 by State Rep John Rosenthal, a Houston Democrat, would also nullify all existing marriage licenses involving minors, including those who move into the state after being married elsewhere. Marriage among teenagers is rare after lawmakers took steps back in 2017 to curb the practice. Still, Rosenthal believes the practice must be abolished entirely. We'd like to hear from you. Give us a call at 713-440-8870. Are you behind this bill, or do you believe it is infringing on the rights of 16 and 17-year-olds or those who wish to marry at this age?
Okay, well, the loophole is parental consent. So normally you cannot marry at 16 or 17, but if you or court order in some cases. But I'm not for or against it. But we have this situation of abortion being illegal, and 16 and 17-year-old females still getting pregnant. So if you have a girl and a guy that find themselves pregnant and they want to get married, why would you not let them? I mean, isn't there? I mean, the whole maturity issue is there, and if this happens, what do you say? Well, we were not going to let you have an abortion. You're going to have this child, but we're not going to let you get married to the father. Mm-hmm. I mean, where do we put all
that's
of
an
this?
interesting point I hadn't thought about in this story. My initial reaction to the story went to the fact about annulling marriages that are already exist. And if there is some way around, because maybe these marriages are working in some cases, but automatically, if you were married at this younger age, they would be annulled. And then where does that leave you legally? But I never thought about the angle you're coming at it from, because also when you look at a lot of religious beliefs, that they believe you should be married to have that child.
Right.
So if the state is blocking it, for a state that seems so gung-ho on being hand in hand with religion.
And no abortions. We're going to talk about the new bills that are saying that even if you do anything to get an abortion pill to someone, you could face a $100,000 fine.
I think that looking at it from you have a young 16 and 17-year-old boy and girl, and they want to get married and they got pregnant, is a very idealistic way of looking at it. I think that traditionally, if you're looking at this from how many young women are being forced into marriage regarding religion or culture, whatever it might be, be is probably much higher than looking at somebody who really they just want to get married because they're in love and they're
how
having
many
a baby.
16-year-olds are married in this state? Like 20? I mean, this is
I don't know.
This is not a huge number of men or women that are married.
You know,
at
we
16.
always invite you to be part of the conversation. It's 713-440-8870. Tiffin is on the line from Katy. What are your thoughts?
It sounds like it's kind of echoing what you were just talking about, where when you have teenage pregnancies, potentially a marriage could help solidify and provide stability to that situation.
Mm-hmm.
And what would be the potential options for girls who find themselves pregnant and don't have a way to kind of commit the father to providing stability and being there?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where on the surface it seems so simple. Of course you shouldn't have these, but once you start looking at the different angles and the different ripples that are in here, it becomes a much more complicated thing. Tiffin, what do you think? At the end of the day, should there be this law?
I feel like there should be some caveats, like maybe it should only be allowed in pregnancy situations. But kids who find themselves in love and just want to get married, that's just immaturity.
Hey, Tiffin, what if they're gay? What if they have two 17-year-old boys that want to get married?
I think that's just immaturity.
Yeah,
I think
wait
if
till
it's
you're
like
mature.
family planning involved, I think that's when it's appropriate.
Tiffin, thank you for calling. We are always interested in what you think. Give us a call, 713-440-8870.
Wow, that's a bill, isn't it?
Yeah, that'll be interesting to follow, and we will keep on it, and we'll share more with you as we know. Moving along to a in some ways, much lighter story, but it may have some deeper thoughts to it. A steakhouse owner in New York has beef with the Texas lawmakers over their Texas's push to rename the New York strip steak to the Texas Strip. Senate Concurrent Resolution 46, if passed by lawmakers in the Lone Star State, would direct the Texas Department of Agriculture to use the new name to promote the cattle industry in the state. You would have the Texas Strip, which is the leading producer of beef in the United States, the Texas industry. The idea was championed by Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. I paused there and stumbled there for a minute because I do remember one time when I was living up in Chicago, coming to Texas, going to Dallas, and we were going to order, and I was like, I want a Texas steak. And they said, you know, the majority of the beef you eat in Texas comes from the Midwest.
Right.
So I think that's interesting then. So where is this beef coming from? I got a beef here.
We export ours.
Where's this beef coming
All right.
from?
Keeping tabs from afar is Todd Shapiro, a New York publicist who owns the War Room Tavern in Albany. He said he'd travel to Austin to testify against the measure if it reaches the full House for a vote and plans to sue if it passes. What are your thoughts about New York and Texas beef over steak? Give us a call, 713-440-8870.
How can you enforce it? I mean, if you're up in New York at Delmonico Steakhouse, which a lot of people call it the Delmonico Steak, same thing.
Yeah.
And they say we have a New York strip on our menu, and you say, oh, no, we renamed that. And you've got to rename that. How is anybody going to enforce it?
I think it's very simple. The measure here should be if the steak is delicious and slices like butter, it's from Texas, baby.
Oh, there you go. I really think
if it's not that great, a little salty, a little rubbery, clearly from New York.
Yeah.
Clearly
Oh, well,
from New York.
I just think it's interesting how free we are these days with renaming things. Seems to be no problem there. Everything from a body of water right off our coast to the person who becomes the Pope. They can all change their names. But boy, oh boy, if you change your name and it's not reflected on your documentation, the state has a huge problem with that.
Oh, yeah.
Just saying.
Well, and didn't the president suggest that the Persian Gulf be renamed the Arabian Gulf?
Yeah, there's a lot of renaming going on.
Iranians
out
are up in arms over it.
All
They're
right, Frank,
furious.
I'm going to move on to your story because I got one I want to get to.
Okay,
so.
and this is about Lance McCullers, who I don't know if you know Lance. I've met him several times. Fabulous supporter of Houston. A great guy, a great athlete. But he said he and his family were the subjects of death threats made on social media after he allowed 7 runs as part of a 10-run first inning for the Cincinnati Reds on Saturday night. Team spokesman said the Astros notified the Houston Police Department, Major League Baseball security about the threats. He, quote, McCullers said, I understand people are very passionate. People love the Astros and love sports, but threatening to find my kids and murder them is a little bit tough to deal with. I can't blame him. I mean, They have 2 young daughters. I hate to think that in this city where kindness is, I think, one of our strong suits, that anyone would make that kind of a threat. So what needs to be done to make sure these threats don't happen again? Right. Stronger punishment? I don't know. If you have an idea, 713-440-8870, we'd love to hear from you.
I think that they're doing what they need to be done, and that is making people aware that this is happening so that people can say, this is bringing it to the forefront and being like, this really happens. This is real.
And it shouldn't.
And it should not be happening.
Right.
And making people feel almost ashamed. Like, you should not be sending death threats over to two little girls. Come on.
I think in the day and age of the internet, we've gotten so free with feeling protected by being anonymous online that people tend to reach out and do things.
But are we? Because you can always find out who sent something and did something. You sort of leave a trail. People forget that you think you're anonymous because you used a different name. You're not. People,
that whole culture is
that
there.
IP number and all?
Yeah, but that's snapping back at things that are said, people going back and forth with that. Speaking of going back and forth, we're going to go back to our beef question, 713-440-8870. Sophia is on the line from Brayburn Glen. Sophia, what are you thinking?
I think that if the steak was born and reared in Texas, it's great to call it a Texas steak.
Mm-hmm.
So born and reared in Texas, where it depends on the origin of the cow.
I think so. There's plenty of steaks that come from Texas that you can get in Texas restaurants. But I also think if it came from somewhere else, then it's okay to call it a New York steak or Del Monaco.
Well, wait a minute. If it comes from Texas, we call it a Texas strip. If it comes from the Midwest, it's a New York strip.
Well, there are Kansas City strips.
See, I think I'm on to the thing, Sophia, of wanting to identify the origin of the beef. I think that's a great idea. That's what I think.
I was in Key West once, and the waiter came up and said, tonight's special is Galveston Bay oysters.
Wow, there's a treat.
I do want to read this comment.
Okay, but first I want to thank Sophia for your call. And remember, you can call us too at 713-440-8870.
My British computer guy on YouTube says, renaming steaks? That's bull. Pun most definitely intended. That made me laugh.
Should toot your own horn there. British.
Unfortunately, we are going to move on. I just want to mention to everyone, today is National Women's Checkup Day. Important
day. Be sure to
day.
get those checkups.
Make sure you do. It's also National Nutty Fudge Day and National Limerick Day. So keep that in mind as we move along.
That's right. Coming up on Hello Houston, the Texas Senate passed a bill that would require public school classrooms to display the 10 Commandments. We'll discuss with State Representative James Talarico about his thoughts on Senate Bill 10. And we continue to take your calls on today's topics at 713-440-8870. This is Hello Houston on News 88.7.
It's more important than ever to stay informed. That's why Houston Public Media delivers well-researched news that's free for everyone.
And right now, your support helps make sure it stays that way. No subscription, no paywall, just news that's here when you need it.
Give today to keep yourself and your community informed, no matter what the future holds.
Make your donation now at houstonpublicmedia.org/donate.
Or call 888-909-0887.
Hi, I'm Craig Cohen, the host of Houston Matters. Join me weekday mornings at 9 or at your leisure on your podcast feed for your daily guide to the people, places, issues, and ideas that define Greater Houston. From politics to the economy, energy to the environment, healthcare to education to transportation and beyond. If it matters to Houston, it matters to us. Check us out wherever you get your podcasts or live on the air weekdays at 9 a.m. right here on News 88.7.
Chinese manufacturers have started courting U.S. consumers on TikTok.
Even with the 145% tariff, it is still going to be drastically cheaper than when you're buying from the brand directly.
I'm Amy Scott, cutting out the middleman, next time on Marketplace.
You can listen to Marketplace coming up tonight at 6:30 on News 88.7.
Support comes from GiveMeTheVIN.com. Purchasing vehicles online with the VIN or license plate and photos, or by bringing the vehicle to Houston area offices. Details at GiveMeTheVIN.com. Houston Public Media presents the Moth Story Slam, May 13th at River Oaks Theater. Doors open at 7 p.m. The theme of the night is Only in Houston. Stories about what makes Houston special. Tickets at HoustonPublicMedia.org/themoth.
And now back to Hello Houston. To share your thoughts on any of today's topics, call 713-440-8870 or email us at talk@hellohouston.org. Now here's Ernie Manous, Celestia Sherman, and Frank Billingsley.
Welcome back to Hello Houston. State Representative James Talarico is one of the youngest elected members of the state legislature. He's a former teacher who was first elected to the Texas House of Representatives back in 2018 and currently serves District 50, which covers parts of Austin and Pflugerville. He is a proud Christian who credits Jesus for being the reason why he's in politics. However, he has been critical of legislation that pushes Christian ideology, including a bill that requires the Ten Commandments to be displayed on classroom walls. State Representative James Talarico, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Representative Talarico, so Senate Bill 10 would mandate the display of the Ten Commandments in all of Texas public school classrooms. You are in seminary, and you're also a former public school teacher, yet you have been one of the bill's fiercest critics. Tell us why you think this would not be a good idea.
Well, I think this bill is not only unconstitutional, un-American, I also think it's deeply unchristian because, we as believers should be bringing policies that seek to feed the hungry, heal the sick, welcome the stranger, serve the poor. But instead of working on those policies, we're trying to force teachers to put up a poster. And that's what gives religious people a bad name. It's what gives Christians a bad name because people see us as using our power to impose our beliefs on other people against their will rather than trying to help people. And so that's why I think this bill is dangerous, again, not only to our Constitution and the separation of church and state, but also dangerous to our religion and our faith.
What do you say to parents who would argue that we are a Christian nation, we were built on Christian foundation, and that understanding this important text in the entire development of our nation should be on display in classrooms outside of simply the religious implications of it?
Well, there are standards in our education system that already require that our educators teach students about the Ten Commandments, teach students about the Bible, as well as other world religions. That's important to understanding American culture and history, as well as the history and cultures of other countries around the world. So no one is disputing that. I think what we're having a debate about is whether or not our government should be uplifting one religious tradition over the others. And, any, I think, understanding of American history, leads us to recognize that our founders did not create a Christian nation. They created a nation where we are free to be Christians, but we're also free to be Jews and Hindus and Buddhists and Muslims and Sikhs and atheists. America was started by religious minorities fleeing religious persecution. And that's why the very first amendment in our Constitution creates a separation between the institutions of the church and the state in the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. And so this kind of bill, I think, does a great disservice to our Constitution and our founders who wrote that Constitution.
With that understanding, what are you hearing from the other side of the aisle on this? Because what you say sounds perfectly logical. Why would they have a different point of view? What is their position?
Well, I try to take everyone at their word about why they're doing something. But I've heard that we need to put the Ten Commandments in every classroom because it's so foundational. There are a lot of documents that are foundational to our country, including the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution itself. In fact, I asked the bill author last week in committee, why not mandate that the Constitution be posted in every classroom, in every public school? And she couldn't give me an answer. And so the only thing I can assume is that there are legislators trying to use their power, their governmental power, to elevate their religious tradition over others because they're worried about, folks not going to church as much as they used to, or folks not being religious like they used to. And so they think using the power of the state will help bring people back to church. And I get that. I get that fear. I see a lot of gray hair at my church too, and I have that fear about the future of a lot of our faith communities. But I just passionately believe I believe that this is not the way to solve that problem. In fact, I think this will have the opposite effect. I think instead of creating a new generation of Christians, I think this kind of policy will create a whole new generation of atheists, because students will see our religion as more about power than it is about love.
Representative Talarico, now looking at this from a logistics standpoint, lawmakers who are in favor of SB 10 say this would have zero financial impact on the school districts, that these posters would be donated. So to a certain extent, they're saying no harm, no foul. The 10 Commandments are a great foundation, as we were just talking about. What do you say to that when they're saying this isn't going to really have that big of a harm and these are great, rules to live by? Put them up in the classroom.
Well, I, as a former teacher, always think about the students who are left out. And as a Christian, I always think about the people who are left out. Jesus is always asking us to be concerned about the outcast, the stranger, the oppressed. And it's really hard to be a Muslim kid in Texas public schools. It's hard to be a Hindu kid in Texas public schools. It's hard to be different when you're a kid. And when you're going to schools in the United States, and especially here in Texas, where Christianity is the dominant religion and the dominant culture, you stick out when you don't belong to that religion. And now the government, the politicians of the state capitol, are going to force your teacher to put a poster on the wall of your classroom that says, "Thou shalt not worship any other god before me." I mean, I'm not a Hindu, but I worry about how that will make a Hindu student feel. And I think it will make them feel unwelcome. Again, that's un-American, and it is deeply un-Christian.
We're also hearing reports about SB 11, which would carve out time for prayer or religious reading in the school day. In one way, that would seem to also go against wanting to put the 10 Commandments in, because once again, you'd go against this too. But on the other side, what could be argued is, well, now there's time for anyone to read whatever religious texts they want and to pray however they want during the school day. It's a nice companion piece. Your thoughts on that?
Well, there will always be prayer in school. As long as there are pop quizzes, there will be prayer in school. But what we're talking about here is government coerced prayer, government mandated prayer. And again, this should be deeply concerning to religious people, because the separation of church and state doesn't just protect the state, doesn't just protect our democracy, it also protects the church. It protects faith communities. I mean, my granddad was a Baptist preacher in South Texas, and Baptists were some of the fiercest defenders of the separation of church and state throughout American history. Thomas Jefferson first uses that phrase, a wall of separation between church and state, in a letter to the Danbury Baptists, because he was trying to speak their language. And the Baptists were very concerned that when the government starts to teach our religion, when the government starts to decide which religion is correct or which interpretation is correct, that's incredibly dangerous for faith communities and for the church. We cannot allow the government to usurp the role of the church. We cannot allow government employees, government bureaucrats, to usurp the role of pastors and Sunday school teachers. And so this kind of bill is incredibly dangerous, not just to our Constitution, not just to our democracy, not just to our students, but also to believers and Christians in particular.
If I don't misunderstand the bill, my reading of it is that it's not instructed. It's just a time when the students can do their own reflection on their own religions. In that particular, if I'm interpreting it correctly, what is so bad about that from your point of view?
Well, that already exists. No one is trying to stop a Christian student, a Muslim student, a Hindu student from praying in school. What we're concerned about is government employees coercing that prayer in school and leading that prayer in school in their position as government employees. And that's a very important line that we don't want to cross. Of course, students of faith should be able to pray in school. I prayed in school all the time as a student. I pray in my job at the state capitol all the time. There's no way I could get through a day without prayer. It's what sustains me and powers me through the day. And I hope that's true for students of all faith backgrounds. But what we can't allow is the government using its incredible power to mandate or force or lead those prayers.
So, Representative Talarico, you're in seminary, you're a Christian. How do you justify that to Republican lawmakers who are saying we are just trying to implement these good things into our public school systems, and you should essentially be aligned with this because you believe in all of these things. You believe in prayer. You believe in reading your Bible and the teachings of Christ. What do you say to people that ask you those questions?
Yeah, I would encourage them to have a more confident faith. God doesn't need the Texas legislature. Jesus doesn't need the Texas legislature. The teachings of our religion stand on their own. They have survived for 2,000 years on their own merits. And that's, I think, something that we should be proud of. We don't need bills to protect or strengthen the teachings of Jesus. We don't need legislation to strengthen Christianity. And in fact, we are endangering our faith when we use governmental power, state power, to try to impose our beliefs on other people. And it's just contrary to everything Jesus taught us to be, humble and meek and servants. That is what we are called to be as followers of Jesus. We are not called to use the power of government to force people to do something against their wills. And so I think I'm being consistent in my role as an elected official and also as a Christian.
To take a broader look at all of this, are you concerned with the amount of attention that the Texas legislature is putting on this religiosality, this Christian approach to education in our state?
Yes. I never thought I would talk so much about religion in this role as a public official. My faith is the reason I ran for office, because I was taught at a very young age that I had to follow two commandments: love God and love neighbor. Those are the two commandments that Jesus gives us as Christians. And serving in this public role is a way for me to love my neighbor by helping to bring down healthcare costs and fund our neighborhood public schools and create more access to childcare. That's how I, as a Christian, am trying to love my neighbors. But I never thought I would talk explicitly about my religion in this public role. But I've been forced to do so because of these Christian nationalist bills that are trying to blur the lines between separation of church and state. I think about my first day in office. I put my hand on our family Bible, which means so much to me and so much to my family, and I raised my other hand and swore an oath to the Constitution. But it wasn't the other way around. I didn't put my hand on the Constitution and swear an oath to uphold the Bible. And I think we've got to understand that distinction, because I am a Christian, but I understand the most dangerous form of government is theocracy, because the only thing worse than a tyrant is a tyrant who thinks they're on a mission from God. And so, my faith in Jesus leads me to reject theocracy, reject Christian nationalism, and recommit myself to the project of a multiracial, multicultural democracy where we can all freely love God and fully love our neighbors.
Focusing on legislation, what bills do you think we should be looking at and moving forward in Austin in Texas?
Well, again, Matthew 25, which is one of my favorite verses of Scripture, tells us exactly how we will be judged and how we will be saved, and that's by feeding the hungry, healing the sick, welcoming the stranger, visiting the prisoner. And so I try to bring bills to the floor that do those things, that help the least of these in our state. And I wish that more of my fellow Christians in the Texas legislature would do the same.
There have been a few very public school bills that have been floating around, HB 2 and SB 2. I'm curious on your views on school vouchers and special ed. How is all of that working out?
Well, I led the fight against Greg Abbott's private school voucher scam because it will defund our public schools across the state and use our tax dollars to subsidize the private education of the wealthy few. These private schools are able to pick and choose what students they let in. And that's their right as a private school. I have no problem with private schools. There are great private schools around the state that do good work, but they aren't the same thing as a public school because they can decide who they admit and who they reject. And if we're going to use taxpayer dollars to subsidize these private schools, then they should be open to everybody. And what you see in most states that try these voucher scams is that the vast majority of the funding ends up going to wealthier parents who are already sending their kids to private school. So instead of sending billions of dollars to our underfunded public schools to give teachers a pay raise, to improve curriculum, to lower class sizes, instead we're sending billions of dollars to parents who are already sending their kids to private school so they can get a discount on their tuition. It's welfare for the wealthy, and it's not a good use of our state dollars, in my opinion.
Well, I understand that. However, this law, it goes into effect in September. What are you thinking moving forward as a representative in your area? How are you going to work across party lines to make sure that these things aren't happening, the things that you technically say that you already know about?
Yeah, I mean, I worry it's too late for this bill because it's already been signed by the governor, and I think it will do tremendous damage to our schools and our communities around the state. But what I'm going to keep trying to do is fight to make sure that the legislature does right by our students in public schools and does right by our public school educators who are doing the hard work in our communities every day to change lives and improve student outcomes. That's what I've been doing since I got elected. It's what I'm going to keep doing despite this voucher scam passing and taking billions of dollars out of our public education system.
For those of us who live in the state of Texas, and we're seeing the time tick out on the legislature for this session, we see bills like the Furries Act being debated and voted on, and it makes me wonder, are we using our time most effectively on the things that really the legislature needs to be focused on, or is there something else going on here at play?
Yeah, I have the same concern. I questioned the author of this Furries Act. I feel a little silly even talking about this, but these are the bills that I'm asked to discuss and what are brought to committee and to the floor, unfortunately. But I asked the bill author if he had any evidence for students dressing up as cats and using litter boxes in our schools, which is exactly what he said is happening. It's what Governor Abbott said is happening around the state. It sounds alarming. I asked him to name a school where that's happening, and he couldn't name a school. The governor also couldn't name a school where that's happening. So this is a complete hoax that they are now writing legislation to address. And so I just don't think we should be writing bills based on debunked internet rumors. I think we should be writing bills that solve actual problems, lowering property taxes, funding our schools, fixing our water infrastructure, fixing our grid. These are the problems that are facing the 30 million people of this state. And we don't need, culture wars that are divisive and based on non-existent problems.
As somebody who's playing in this sandbox, no pun intended, what is really at play here? They have to realize across the board where the concerns are in this state, where the financial issues lie in this state, where the education problems lie in this state. Why are these the bills that are getting attention? Why are they even being created?
Well, one thing I think it's important to remember is that because of redistricting, many legislators have districts that are overwhelmingly blue or overwhelmingly red. And so all those legislators have to do to get reelected is satisfy their primary base, their primary electorate. not the general electorate. And the people who vote in primaries tend to be more partisan than regular voters. And so they've got to, on the Republican side, they've got to feed up these red meat culture war issues so that they don't get primaried by someone who's farther to the right than they are. So this is a structural problem in our political system where we gerrymander districts to be incredibly partisan. We have primary elections that cater to the most extreme voters in the electorate. And that's what leads to this kind of ridiculous policymaking at the state capitol and this extremism that is doing great damage to our state. I'll also say that on the education front, this is part of a larger effort by very wealthy special interests, billionaire mega donors in particular. I think about Tim Dunn and Ferris Wilks and Betsy DeVos and Jeff Yass. They have executed a smear campaign against our public schools to justify privatization schemes like this voucher scam that just passed. And it's always been a two-step process. You've got to discredit public schools so that you can defund public schools. And that's why you've seen these attacks on our librarians, calling them groomers and banning books. That's why you've seen people attacking teachers, accusing them of indoctrination. That's why you saw this furries bill accusing schools of providing litter boxes to students. I mean, ridiculous stuff. It's all an elaborate, well-funded, manufactured smear campaign against our public schools so that these wealthy special interests can privatize the system and make money off of our kids.
Representative, thank you for sharing your views with us today.
James Talarico is the state representative for Texas District 50. Again, Representative Talarico, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up on Hello Houston, ever notice those colorfully painted utility boxes while driving around town? There are over about 300 mini murals around town. We'll talk to the inspiration behind these as Hello Houston continues.
I want to make a movie about this.
The Arts Hour brings you film.
The themes in it are so far ahead of their time.
Books.
The detail is amazing.
Art.
There's all the personal stuff.
Theatre.
Lots of singing and dancing and colours.
Music.
The dance floor is made for dancing.
And everything in between.
I want it to be exciting.
That's the Arts Hour with me, Nikki Beatty.
I really identified with it.
From the BBC.
The Arts Hour, Friday nights at 9 on News 88.7.
Support for Houston Public Media comes from IL Texas, helping to prepare students for leadership roles in the international community by emphasizing servant leadership, language immersion, and character building. More at iltexas.org. Support comes from Gen Pro, a Houston-based home generator service providing power to homes during unexpected outages, helping with connectivity and productivity. More information is available at genpro.com.
Support for Houston Public Media comes from listeners like you and from St. Luke's Health and the St. Luke's Foundation, supporting clinical excellence, compassionate care, and a healthier future for all. More at supportstlukes.org.
Support comes from Novotny & Company, offering commercial and residential property tax protests for 38 years. The deadline to file a protest is May 21st in Harris County. Info and online filing at novotnycompany.com. Support comes from Theater Under the Stars, presenting In the Heights, the first Broadway musical from Lin-Manuel Miranda, creator of Hamilton. Runs May 20th through June 1st at the Hobby Center. Tickets at tuts.org. Support comes from Asia Society Texas, announcing 31 ways to celebrate Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, featuring Vicki Wynn, sharing her journey from boat baby to NBC News. More at asiasociety.org/Texas.
And now back to Hello Houston. To comment on any of today's topics, call 713-440-8870 or email us at talk@hellohouston.org. Now back to Ernie Manous, Celeste Diaz-Sherman, and Frank Billingsley.
And we are back again.
Nice interview with Representative Talarico.
Ah, thank you.
Lori
Thank
from
you.
Katy said that she wanted to say he's a big hero of hers. And Julie from the Galleria said she agrees with Talarico's point of view on these issues. So,
yeah,
folks are listening.
We make our platform open to our elected officials. So if you are a state legislator and you want to be on the show, reach out to us. We want to hear from all sides of issues, and all are welcome here.
Come on down. Yeah. All right, mini murals. These are wonderful. These electric boxes all over. This is an award-winning civic art program. It transforms the traffic signal control boxes into these beautiful works of art to make the community, I think it uplifts the community. It just makes everybody feel better, and they're beautiful. This was created by Up Art Studio in 2015, has the support of everybody, the mayor's office, the city council members, Fresh Arts, East End Foundation. And really the team behind it is the husband-wife little couple here that we have in our studio right now, Elia and Noah Quiles.
Thanks, Frank. Thank you, Frank. Thanks for having us.
Directors of mini murals, for sure. I want to get first your mic on, and secondly, tell me how many. There we go. How many of these murals are there around here?
I'll take that answer.
What is this, Jeopardy over there?
Yeah. What is 425 mini murals to date?
Wow.
There's 2,600 cabinets total. The goal is to knock them all out.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's get to the nuts and bolts. Who came up with this idea?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
No, it is?
I'm going to tell you. No, I wish I take all the credit now.
Okay, good.
Okay. So she came to me. We were in Art Basel, and she goes, babe, this is amazing. They're doing it. And they're doing it in California. They did it in a small town somewhere in Texas.
Dublin, they're
doing it in Dublin. I said, you know what? Why not Houston? And, well, I should actually say, she said, why not Houston? And I was like, let's do it. So then we found the individual at Public Works who was the director. And I simply asked, are you the right person? He goes, I am. But I also don't have any money for you. I was like, no problem.
We'll find a way.
Yeah.
So basically the city gave you the space to put them on, and then you guys had to go out and create the concept and the institution around it to be able to do it.
Correct, Ernie. So they are the owners of the property who do the maintenance, and they, our taxpayer money pays for, Public Works to go and install these to make sure that with the traffic signal control cabinets keep everyone safe. It's really important that everybody uses the crosswalks.
So did you just put a call out to artists and say, hey, who's interested?
We have done open calls in the past. We have an artist roster, probably about 80 local artists currently, and probably every 2 years or so we do open calls.
And so are the artists able to just go and do whatever is inspiring them at that moment, or do they have to send in different what kind of restrictions, or what does that look like when you're working with artists and the city?
So it's based on who sponsors the cabinet, and they're the ones that have a say in what goes on the boxes themselves. We approach design in a number of ways. Some sponsors will select a specific artist from our roster, or they will look through our portfolios of concepts that the artists have already, come up with. And in other cases, they're like, we want something specific, or we want our community, our neighborhood to decide what's going to be
represent. Mm-hmm. Elia, do you have a favorite that you love?
There's so many. It's hard. It's really hard to say. But there is one which looks like Mexican embroidery. Oh, I know that one. And it's really beautiful, and it looks so lifelike.
And where is that located?
It's in the East End on Canal and Sampson.
Yeah, not too far from our studio.
So recently, you folks got a lot of attention going on some national morning program. Want to tell us a little about
a little program?
Yeah. So Elia got this call, and she says, "Oh, this group wanted to do an interview," and I was like, "Who?" And she said, "NBC." And I was
NBC.
I was like, "Are you sure about that?" I was like,
"You mean KPRC?" Like, no.
And so,
big NBC.
So then, take it away, Elia.
Yeah, and so she said, "I'm going to pitch it to a couple of different shows, and don't expect a call back right away." But a week later, she called back and she said, the Today Show wants to do this.
Yeah, I saw the interview. Yeah. And it was the first time I'd ever heard. I mean, I've seen these murals. There's one around near River Oaks District. We walk by it all the time when we go to
And there's one off Woodway that I love. It's a Houston Oilers kind of theme. And
I think we've all seen them. And then we just say, and then we just, we're driving, so you don't think too much about them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they're not, sorry, go ahead.
Well, what has the reaction been?
I mean, the reaction has been nothing but positive. People people just love them. People identify, where they live. Sometimes we're like, oh, I live by the Willie Nelson box, or I'm over here by this one.
Or what happened to the Frida Kahlo box by our house?
And are they continuing?
We are getting ready to renegotiate our contract.
The city is about to renew our contract. Yeah, so we're working through the renewal. But I did want to say also from the conversation earlier, it's not just City of Houston boxes that we're doing. We also do TxDOT boxes and Harris County boxes. And so recently we've started working more with TxDOT, and so that's kind of expanded our possibilities as well.
What about
you're in
upkeep?
Austin too, right?
Yes, we've done some in Austin.
Yeah. What about upkeep? When they start to show, because they've been up now for a while.
They have
Yes,
been.
I remember when we were all together when it was launching the program.
I'll take that question.
Okay.
So I'm head of production. So what we do is we utilize industrial coatings from the start. So we're working with a box that's supposed to be out in the element, so that it's supposed to withstand hurricanes, right? Floods, car impacts, everything. So as a coatings expert from years past, I said, let's take this approach and let's utilize industrial coatings for the primer. Then we use, we've learned our lesson by letting artists be creative and use their materials. And now we have a standard of materials that they use. Then we put our 2-part epoxy clear coat that is a UV protective and also a anti-graffiti coating. And it's made by Axel Nobel, and they've sponsored us for about a decade now. And I don't know if you know,
there'd be nothing worse than having these all over and having them look shabby. So you make sure they look good.
That's a great point. Have you had somebody graffiti over them?
Yes.
And what would you say has been one of your more controversial boxes? Have you had one where maybe perhaps the community didn't love it?
There's two that I can think of.
Okay, I'm gonna go with Obama.
Oh, I was going to go with Malala.
Ooh,
yeah.
Okay, so tell us about those.
So
with Malala, the artist had painted it.
Sweetest girl
apparently,
ever.
there was a resident who lived like right across the street, and he did not appreciate the politics of it. I guess
he did not realize there was a camera.
And so he
so often that happens.
He took it upon himself to deface it, and then
Not once, but twice.
And then we all said, we're not going to really stand for that. So the artist came back on her own accord and said, I'm going to redo it. I mean, I just, to show him that he can't,
Is that illegal to deface a box?
Absolutely,
it is. It is, because it's city
100%.
property.
It's city property. We have the legal agreement to be on site, the insurance, and the whole. Anyone can go out and apply to paint their own traffic signal control cabinet, but not everyone can paint a mini mural.
Well, and you have to meet certain criteria. There's insurance that you have to carry and things like that.
So how many? What's the possibility? 100,000, 2,000?
Yeah, there's just
endless, Frank, endless.
Just in the city of Houston, there's 1,600 cabinets. 2,600 cabinets.
Oh,
and we're also doing ones outside of Houston, so like League City, Pasadena, Katy.
So if we could go back in time, Frank.
We only have 1 minute to do that, so go back quickly.
So we would going back in time. When we started cabinets, no one wanted to fund it. We found a council member who wanted to fund it. Then we did the 30 boxes. Then we did a capital fundraising campaign where we raised $100,000.
Wow.
Oh wow.
Yeah. No,
it was more than that.
It was in it for 100 boxes, which was $250,000 for our capital fund campaign.
I want to mention really quickly, if people want to go see all these, it's a great website, minimurals.org.
Absolutely.
You can see them all. And you can see them by where they're located, what neighborhood they're in, who the artist is, the exact intersection, minimurals.org.
And very quickly, in the 15 seconds we have left, you do more than just those boxes. You've been beautifying our city with murals all over.
Yes, absolutely. Look out for our Big Walls, Big Dreams mural festival coming in September.
And
check out subject.
Excellent.
Check out the Houston
I've
mural map.
already been the subject.
Love it. Elia and Noah Quiles are the directors of Mini Murals. Thank you both for joining us today on Hello Houston.
We appreciate you for having us.
Coming up on Hello Houston, Seth Chandler, professor of law at the University of Houston, helps us break down the Alien Enemies Act, and we'll look at the impact FDA changes are having on businesses. Stay with us for the second hour of Hello Houston.
Stay tuned. There's more Hello Houston on the way with Ernie Manous, Celestia Sherman, and Frank Billingsley. For the latest in local news, subscribe to the Hello Houston daily newsletter at houstonpublicmedia.org. Hello Houston is a production of Houston Public Media. The opinions expressed by the guests of this program are solely their own and do not represent the views of management, staff, or underwriters of Houston Public Media. This is News 88.7.
Join us for Hello Houston, weekdays from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., taking a deep dive into the stories that matter to Houstonians, keeping you informed, engaged, and entertained. With the generous support from our founding sponsor, Kathy Sanders.
Lots of sunny weather today. Will warm up to around 84 right now. 76. This is your NPR station, KUHF, Houston. News 88.7, the service of the University of Houston. It's 12 o'clock.
Just ahead on this hour of Hello Houston, we continue diving into the top stories of the day, such as Senate Bill 2880, which allows anyone who manufactures, distributes, mails, prescribes, or provides an abortion-inducing drug to be sued for up to $100,000. I'm Frank Billingsley.
And I'm Celeste Diaz-Sherman. We'll then speak with University of Houston Law Center professor Seth Chandler, who joins us to discuss immigration policies and the Constitution.
And I'm Ernie Manous, plus an FDA compliance and regulation expert. We'll discuss the recent Food and Drug Administration's regulatory changes and how they'll affect businesses.
And we want to hear from you, so give us a call at 713-440-8870 or email us at talk@hellohouston.org. You can also watch us on our YouTube channel. Just go to hellohouston.org and click the big orange button.
Hello Houston is made possible in part by founding sponsors John Bradshaw and Kathy Sanders, and by gifts from listeners like you.
Live from NPR News, I'm Lakshmi Singh. Cheering in Idan Alexander's hometown in New Jersey after news that the last living American hostage held in Gaza has been freed. According to a statement by Hamas and an Israeli official who spoke to NPR on condition of anonymity, Hamas militants released the 21-year-old Israeli soldier to representatives of the International Committee of the Red Cross. Russia launched dozens of drone attacks across Ukraine overnight, killing at least one person and injuring nearly 24 others. The attacks effectively mark Russia's rejection of calls by Kyiv and its European allies for an immediate ceasefire ahead of possible peace talks later this week. From Moscow, NPR's Charles Maines has more.
According to Ukrainian officials, Russia launched more than 100 drones across multiple regions of Ukraine beginning late Sunday. Russia's defense ministry confirmed the attacks, but said its forces struck a range of military targets, including Ukrainian army air bases and arms depots. Ukraine, with backing from the U.S. and Europe, had been demanding Monday mark the start of a month-long ceasefire, threatening massive new sanctions should Russia refuse. Instead, Russian President Vladimir Putin called for direct talks with Ukraine in Istanbul, Turkey later this week in an apparent attempt to seize the diplomatic initiative. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has since agreed to the talks but challenged Putin to meet in person. Charles Maines, NPR News, Moscow.
Pope Leo XIV is offering his appreciation to journalists for their service to the truth. NPR's Jason DeRose says the Pope met with members of the media today at the Vatican.
Pope Leo began his remarks on a lighter note in English, following a round of applause from guests.
They say when they clap at the beginning, it doesn't matter much. If you're still awake at the end and you still want to applaud, thank you very much.
But then he turned serious and switched to Italian. Leo called on journalists to strive for communication that, quote, does not seek consensus at all costs and never separates the search for truth from the love with which the truth is sought. And he reiterated the Catholic Church's solidarity with journalists who are imprisoned for seeking and reporting the truth, especially in war-torn regions. Jason DeRose, NPR News, Rome.
House Republicans are promoting a plan that critics warn will leave millions of poor people without Medicaid and forces millions more to pay for care or pay more for care. The proposal, unveiled yesterday, calls for at least $880 billion in cuts, largely to Medicaid, to help pay for President Trump's sweeping agenda. That includes $4.5 trillion in tax breaks and more military spending. Proponents argue that new eligibility and work requirements under the plan will generate big savings. From Washington, this is NPR News.
Live from News 88.7 in Houston, I'm Gabrielle Dawkins.
ERCOT, which operates the power supply across the state, says they will be ready for the incoming heat wave this week. Temperatures are expected to climb into the mid-90s this week. ERCOT says they expect power supply to exceed demand. KHOU reports that an increase in solar power and storage systems has improved reliability for the system. The high temperatures really begin tomorrow. And many Houston ISD students, parents, and former staff took to the district's last school board meeting to share concerns about the end of its wraparound service department. As News 88.7's Colleen de Guzman reports, those services provided students with non-academic support like food and clothing.
I am here to talk about the wraparound specialists that are being fired.
That's elementary student Calvin Warren speaking to the district's Board of Managers, which decided last month to eliminate the department, letting go of nearly 50 specialists. The district has shifted its support services to its Sunrise Centers, designated locations providing similar support. Naja Callender with HISD says the district is still providing holistic care for students
to ensure that our students get what they need so that they can focus on learning.
But criticisms of the decisions were harsh. Here's Ellen Walter.
Cutting wraparound services is one of the worst things this board will be known for.
Warren was holding back tears.
If you keep firing your staff, we will fire you.
I'm Colleen de Guzman, News 88.7.
It was a record-breaking day for Astros pitcher Ronel Blanco. On Mother's Day, Blanco struck out a career high, 11 hitters in Houston's 6-0 win over Cincinnati. The Astros took 2 of the 3 games in the series and will take on the Kansas City Royals tonight. It's 70 degrees on the UH campus, sunny with a high near 84. I'm Gabrielle Dawkins, News 88.7.
Support for NPR comes from Subaru. The new Forester Hybrid offers symmetrical all-wheel drive and up to 581 miles per tank. Part of the new Forester Hybrid family of SUVs. More at Subaru.com/Forester Hybrid. This is NPR.
From Houston Public Media and News 88.7, it's Hello Houston, an open forum on today's biggest stories affecting Houston and beyond. Call now, 713-440-8870, or let us know your thoughts on today's topics by emailing us at talk@hellohouston.org. And now here's your host for Hello Houston, Ernie Manous, Celestia Sherman, and Frank Billingsley.
The noon hour is upon us. People are having lunch. We don't get to have lunch.
I had a protein bar.
Celeste did too earlier.
Yeah.
I didn't get one. If you'd like to see me suffer through not eating, you can do it on our YouTube channel. We broadcast live while we're on the air, so we're streaming over there, youtube.com/Houston Public Media, or you can just go to our website, hellohouston.org, and we can connect you right through the orange bar. Like, subscribe, and ring that bell when you find us, and join the chat online. We monitor that. Also, email us, talk@hellohouston.org. See, I'm giving you all the ways you can engage with us, so once we get into the show, you're armed and ready. Probably the easiest way to join the conversation is calling or texting us at 713-440-8870. Celeste, a few people were reaching out, texting us.
Yes, we have been receiving text, and Jeff from Northwest Houston said about the Representative Talarico interview that Ernie and I did earlier, said, as a non-Christian, he was very impressed with Talarico. He says Talarico's attitude of being a good person for the sake of being good would get him to become a Christian, not the pushing of ideology that Republicans seem to force on others. We also received a comment about the topic at the beginning of the hour that I mentioned about a bill banning marriages within teenagers and children on young marriages. This man says, or woman says, when I taught on the east side of Houston from 2009 to 2011, breaking up PDA in the hallway was met with the response, Miss, this is my husband. Marriages under 18 of age are far more common than you think.
Interesting.
That is very interesting.
So remember, we're interested in what you have to say. Share with us as we work through all the topics on today's show. Give us a call, 713-440-8870, and join the conversation. One thing quickly that we do have to point out, that weather is just beautiful out there.
It's
right
beautiful.
in the
Great
moment.
weekend. It is. It's going to get really hot, especially by Wednesday. Temperatures in the mid-90s pretty much for the rest of the week. Humidity returns by the weekend.
Humidity. Anyway, coming up this hour, we got a lot more still to talk about. We are going to be talking about the FDA and their regulations on things, as well as a deep dive into the Alien Enemies Act, the old act that is being used by the current administration for deportation. So how does it cut mustard? We'll find out coming up. But as always, we like to begin with the topics of the hour. Celeste, lead us off.
The Texas abortion pill bill, Senate Bill 2880, passed in the Senate last week. This allows anyone who manufactures, distributes, mails, prescribes, or provides an abortion-inducing drug to be sued for up to $100,000. It expands on the wrongful death statute to encourage family members, especially men who believe their partner had an abortion, to sue up to 6 years after the event, and empowers the Texas Attorney General to bring lawsuits on behalf of unborn children of residents of this state. The bill, has approved by the Senate, contains many provisions that legal experts say might spark a lawsuit challenging it on a constitutional ground. The bill says no state judge has jurisdiction to rule on its constitutionality, and if they were to do it in any way, they can be personally sued for $100,000. The judge would waive their usual protection of governmental immunity and could not call on the Office of the Attorney General to defend them in court. The bill has been referred to a House committee where a companion bill faced significant pushback earlier this month. What do you think about the abortion pill bill? Give us a call or shoot us a text at 713-440-8870.
So if I understand this right,
there was a lot.
There is a lot, but on the face of it, it might be unconstitutional, but we're not going to allow any judges in Texas to test that constitutionality, and if they attempt to, they're going to be sued for $100,000. So it's like it's like handcuffing any sort of judicial branch to making any judgment on this, on whether this is legal or not.
What jumps out to me in this is the Attorney General being able to bring a lawsuit on behalf of the unborn children of residents of the state of Texas. Because if I am reading this correctly, in Texas, unborn children are not explicitly recognized as citizens under the same legal framework as born children. So it gets into a difficult point there, which has been debated a lot. When does first of all, when does a person become a person has been argued on multiple levels when it comes to abortion. But when does one become a citizen of the state and held to the jurisdiction and the laws of that state, which would enable the Attorney General to step in and represent them if they aren't yet a citizen because they have not yet been born?
I also find it extremely concerning that it says it expands the wrongful death statute to encourage family members, especially men who believe their partner had an abortion, to sue up to 6 years after the event. And I find that so interesting that here we have state lawmakers who all are 100% behind keeping women and children safe. And this is putting women in a very vulnerable position.
Because to prove that abortion occurred, you're going to have to sue for records that are covered under HIPAA, I imagine. But you're going to have, how else are you going to prove that you can't just say my girlfriend had an abortion?
Well, how can you prove it was your child?
Correct.
Too, 6 years later, I think there's
a lot of absurdity in this bill. It was been met with some pushback. I hope it continues to be pushed back.
I also have a problem with responsibility. And I know this is probably an unpopular point of view, and I mean it from more of a legal point of view than from a humanitarian point of view. It seems as though it takes the responsibility in a lot of ways away from the person choosing to have the abortion and going after the provider and the mail service and the this and the that. What happened to the person who commits the crime is responsible for the crime?
Wait a minute. Sorry.
So if
I'm confused.
It is, because what they're saying is it would allow anyone who manufactures, distributes, mails, prescribes, or provides an abortion-inducing drug to be sued. shouldn't that onus be on the person who used or took advantage of or did?
So you're saying the woman that went and had an abortion.
Right.
So you think they should be responsible for
right,
this?
for what the behaviors they do. Because if you then move it over to gun control, then why not apply this then to any kind of thing that happened with gun violence?
So you think women should be prosecuted
No,
at
I'm
this
saying
level?
in the understanding of legalese of it all. You can't have it both ways. So if when you're talking about guns, and I know this had nothing to do with guns, but I'm going there, if you can say, no, it's the fault of the person who shot someone, they're responsible. Because in school shootings and stuff, there's been talk about going after the manufacturers and the distributors and all of that of guns. Well, then they would be fair game then, too.
So then the way I see it, what you're saying is then the man who impregnated the woman should be the one held responsible if she gets an abortion because he's the one that originally impregnated her.
I think that the couple together. I think that the couple together is responsible for it, but then I think then there's also a problem of male rights in this situation.
And also,
rape.
There's rape, and also there's also men who might say,
I'm not endorsing going after.
No.
What I'm saying is, if you're talking legal, they're moving the responsibility away from the people involved in it to go after distributors and manufacturers and all of that. But they don't do the same when it comes to guns.
Okay, help me here for just a second. Is this abortion pill? Is it something that you take after having sex to make sure you don't get pregnant, or something you take after you know you're pregnant?
There's the day after pill.
Okay, but
does this include the day after pill? I would assume so.
Well, okay. Well, if you're, but all you're doing with the day after pill is saying, I had unprotected sex last night, whether it was consensual or not, and I want to take this pill to make sure I do not get pregnant. It doesn't mean I am pregnant. It just means I don't want to. Hey, how is that different than using a condom? Right. Isn't that the same purpose of a condom?
And we want to remind you, you can join the conversation at 713-440-8870. And we have a call right now from Anna Marie from Pearland.
We got her comment on text there. Says the law they're trying to pass about abortions is absolutely disgusting.
I just think there's so many problems in it. And I think, my point I'm trying to make is that it seems as though they can shift the law depending on where they feel it should be in a situation. Okay, so this is for abortion, then we're going to blame manufacturers and distributors and all that. But when it's a guns right issue, then it's the fault of the person who shoots the gun. And it's like, well, wait, why can't it be the same? It's just that's where my problem is.
Well,
is that
but
there's
this also includes this provision to your gun analogy. Even if you think they should be prosecuted, we're not going to let any judge come and try the case.
And then the judge
this is
part
crazy.
Gets more.
A judge can't make a constitutional ruling on a law, and if they do, the attorney general can go after them, and they have no protections.
There's just so many problems.
This is this is not democracy.
No. Well,
we have three branches in democracy, and
you can't block the
judicial. You can't block the judiciary and call it America.
I'm really quite tired of just men in general talking about women's reproductive rights, and it's one of those things where it feels like oftentimes we mask things as protecting women, but when you look at the real legislation, you look at the real policy that is out there, it is not protecting women.
It's controlling women.
Exactly.
Yes.
I agree with you.
I agree. And I hope you understand, all of you listening. My point is not to say that women should be prosecuted. I'm saying if you're going to write laws like this, you got to look across the whole spectrum of what are these laws you're passing, because it seems it's very cherry-picked. And I think this goes to Celeste's point. They pick and choose where they want certain things to happen and all that. Like why in this one case can't judges weigh in, but on other ones judges can. I mean, it's like, what are you saying?
It's whether they think they'll get a favorable ruling or not.
You know what? We do have a call. Let's grab. And Alvin is calling with various subjects that Alvin wants to talk about from the Third Ward. Alvin, what's on your mind today? Keep it brief, keep it pithy, and we'll go to it.
All right, guys. How you doing?
Doing well.
Well, so what I wanted to touch upon was some of the things you guys are talking about. What you just experienced amongst you guys over the past, I'd probably say, couple of minutes, is a microcosm of the problem between the separation of church and state, or not adhering to it. The founding fathers had already worked out what we're arguing right now, which is you actually pervert both the church and you pervert the state when you actually intermingle these things. They actually got that from their experience in Europe. We have already run this experiment hundreds of years ago. And we're actually trying to entrap ourselves into the diabolical dynamic that every theocracy experiences around the world. That's it.
Elvin,
I agree.
Thank you very much for that. I know that's applying also to the Talarico interview that we did earlier. Plus, it does apply to what we were just talking about again, that when you start commingling these two things, it leads to issues and problems. And as Alvin put it, this was something that we were the answer to this problem 250 odd years ago.
And why we have a court system to help sort it out.
Yeah. Good point. 713-440-8870. Share with us your thoughts and concerns. Quickly, another story I want to jump to. Eric and Lyle Menendez.
Yep.
You know, Monsters, we saw the TV series. It got a lot of attention. They were just about ready to be released from prison. There was an election. The DA in LA got shifted around, or in California, and now it's gone back and forth. Well, the Menendez brothers' much anticipated resentencing hearing will happen May 13th and 14th. And the judge should rule by Friday.
What do you think, Celeste?
To catch people up, the Menendez brothers, they were 18 and 21, I think, 18 and 20, walked into the house, shot their parents dead.
Served 30 years, more or less.
Went, reloaded, came back in, finished off mom, and lied about it. Then went to prison.
And they are where they belong, in prison, where they should stay.
What do you think the point of prison is?
It is not. Killing your parents is
Says
a
a mother.
whole other level of I think. It's a whole different level. I'm sorry. You cannot cold-bloodedly walk in and kill your parents and say, after 30 years, you know, you've been reformed and you should go out there. I'm sorry. There are certain things that people are in prison for, and absolutely 100%. We need to look at making sure that they are rehabilitated and get provided support and putting out. This specific crime that we are talking about, that we know, was cold-blooded murder. And it was to their parents.
To add into the case, there was allegations of sexual abuse.
There are lots of people that are sexually abused that do not kill their parents.
When the retrial, because the first jury was hung, when the retrial happened, the retrial happened, and it was that they were not allowed to introduce the abuse, what they called at the time the abuse excuse. And now, in times past, there's become more evidence that has come out that supports that they were abused, and they never got to have that heard in their hearing, in their trial.
Sorry, there are a lot of people that are abused. You do not kill your parents cold-bloodedly. Full stop.
It could almost go the other way. If you're just randomly killing people.
There are people in prison that
have
done a lot less.
Let me say my side.
There are people that have done in prison that have done a lot less that are sitting in prison, and we're looking at them because it's been romanticized, and Hollywood is looking at their. Let's start looking at people sitting in prison right now that have done a lot less type of crimes that are in there that will never get a chance for us to talk about it on this show.
Well, you can compare all you want, but I think, and I appreciate your point, but also on the other side of that, when two young men are driven to kill their parents, there's something going on. And
they should have sought out help before they killed their parents.
You listen to me. Don't interrupt me.
They're going to fight.
Well, and if someone is out there just randomly killing somebody at the grocery store or whatever, then that person, I think, is more dangerous to society because they didn't really have a rhyme or reason. They just went in and started killing. These two guys seemed to have had a rhyme and reason. And after 30 years, that has been looked at enough to give them a chance to at least have due process on this.
The other part of it is...
I completely disagree with you.
I don't completely disagree with
so
you,
in California,
but I don't completely agree with you either.
Hold on. And in California, too, another wrinkle to throw into this is at the age of which they committed these crimes, their sentencing said without the possibility of parole. Had that not been there, had the judge decided, since there were possible causes for why they behaved in the way they did, they would still be convicted of murder, but they would, like many others, have the possibility of parole because, as harsh as it is to say, the chances of them murdering their parents again are nil, and it wasn't like they were on a killing spree killing other people. After 30 years, they would have been eligible for parole years before, and they would probably have been back in society.
So there's the idea that they've served their time, whether you like it or not. We don't throw people in prison for the rest of their lives unless there's...
What did they do right after they killed their parents?
Well, they went on a shopping spree. They lied.
They lied
about what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And
I guarantee you there are a lot of women sitting in prison that have done much less crimes that will never get this type of conversation and look at their cases.
Absolutely.
And so that is my issue with this, is that the Menendez brothers are now a Hollywood name, and so we're looking at them and will they, da-da-da-da. No, they're absolutely not.
But they didn't make themselves a Hollywood meme.
Yes, they did. They were pretty boys. They were in L.A.
Wasn't their fault.
That's not their fault.
Come on. What
made
them?
Come on.
No,
made
them a Hollywood
name?
producers.
Hold on.
Hollywood producers that made
Hold
them.
on, people. What made them a Hollywood name was Court TV was a startup looking for the next big story to tell, and they latched onto this, and Leslie Abramson, their lawyer, presented them in a way, and they became cause celebs, and they were on all the... I followed that trial day in and day out. I feel like I know the Menendez brothers.
And they didn't say, hey, let's make this a big deal about us.
No, if the Menendez brothers were not wealthy and white, and if they were not, from L.A., and if they did not have the story that they had behind them, we would not be talking about them.
Absolutely.
And that's my issue with it.
That is correct. But the way we're supposed to be in our justice system is simply the fact that each case stands on its own merits and should be looked at isolated from all other cases. And so in that case, did they serve their time? Are they still a threat? Have they learned? Theoretically, too, an argument has been made. In prison, they worked to rehabilitate others, to work with others, believing they would never have a chance for this parole. This is something new that came into their world. So on their own reconnaissance, they were doing the right things to move forward with their lives, thinking they would be in prison the rest of their lives. So were they rehabilitated? Did prison serve the purpose it was there for? That's for you to decide at 713-440-8870.
I have more, but coming up on Hello Houston, University of Houston Law Center professor Seth Chandler talks with us about immigration and the Constitution. And we continue to take your calls on today's topics at 713-440-8870. This is Hello Houston on News 88.7.
It can be hard to stay informed about what's happening in our city, our state, and across the country. That's why Houston Public Media makes it easier.
Everything you hear on News 88.7 is powered by you, not advertisers. 80% of our funding comes from our Houston community.
That's what makes public media different. It's community funded and always here for you when you need it.
Join that community now at houstonpublicmedia.org/donate or call 888-909-0887.
Support comes from Serverless Solutions, aligning businesses with technology, including cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and cloud-based infrastructure. More information is available at serverless-solutions.com.
Support for Houston Public Media comes from Rice University's Master of Liberal Studies, a flexible degree taught by Rice faculty that balances life and learning for working adults. More at gls.rice.edu.
Support for Houston Public Media comes from attorney mediator Ron Bankston, providing in-person, video conferencing, and hybrid mediation and arbitration services. More information is available at ronbankston.com.
Support for Houston Public Media comes from Specs, celebrating and focusing on tequila for sipping, margaritas, and more throughout the month of May. Recipes and more at specsonline.com. The fun starts here. Support for Houston Public Media comes from listeners like you and from St. Luke's Health and the St. Luke's Foundation, supporting clinical excellence, compassionate care, and a healthier future for all. More at supportstlukes.org. Houston Public Media brings to you PBS World. Experience the personal connection behind the headlines with programming devoted to telling stories that humanize complex issues. PBS World on TV 8.6 and online at houstonpublicmedia.org.
And now back to Hello Houston. To comment on any of today's topics, call 713-440-8870 or email us at talk@hellohouston.org. Now back to Ernie Manous, Celeste Diaz-Sherman, and Frank Billingsley.
Welcome back to Hello Houston. Last week, 2 more federal judges blocked President Trump from deporting migrants under the Alien Enemies Act. President Trump has invoked the use of the wartime law to deport migrants during the first few months of his administration. But why? And what do these court rulings mean for the future of this law? To explore with us more, we welcome Professor Seth Chandler from the University of Houston Law Center, who specializes in constitutional law. Welcome to Hello Houston.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Great to have you here. Let's start off with a little understanding of what we're talking about. If you can give us the historical purpose for the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. I want to make sure people know when this was first created and how exactly the Trump administration is using it or interpreting it.
Yes, this is not a 19th century law. This is an 18th century law. And maybe in high school you studied something called the Alien and Sedition Act, and maybe it's past your memory, but this is the alien part of the Alien and Sedition Act, and it provided that we were sort of in what was called a quasi-war with France at the time, where we were worried that French revolutionaries were going to come and maybe have something more radical than we'd recently had in our own revolution. And so it provided that if the president found that there was an invasion or a predatory incursion, then he could remove persons age 14 and above from the nation with whom we were at war. And although the sedition part of the Alien and Sedition Act died sort of on its own and was heavily challenged, this part of the act, the Alien Enemies Act, has lived on since 1798, been invoked on a few occasions, the last in World War II, and has now been revived by the Trump administration.
Help understand invasion and incursion and how we have, at least up to now, understood those words.
Right. So that's been the issue, and that's the issue confronting the courts these days, is does invasion, and it has to be an invasion, by the way, by a foreign nation, not just an invasion by soccer players or something.
Or gang
members.
members.
Or the Beatles, or possibly gang members. You know, if I see Venezuelan tanks running up and down Buffalo Speedway, then I will figure there's been an invasion or a predatory incursion. But the idea, certainly, of opponents of the use of the Alien Enemies Act and of all the judges who have looked at it recently, is that it means a physical invasion by a nation, something that we traditionally understand as what would happen during wartime.
And just before we get into all the questioning, then explain how the Trump administration is understanding these words.
Their theory is, first of all, that there is a foreign nation invading us because of the ties between Tren de Aragua and the Venezuelan government. And
so the gang to the government.
The gang has infiltrated the government in their view, and the Maduro government is using the gangs as a vehicle of mischief.
So they represent Venezuela.
That's their view. And that they don't think it needs to be a traditional invasion. Imagine if there was a cyber attack on the United States from North Korea or Iran or some other nation. Why are we limited to the 1798 view of an invasion? Why can't statutes evolve their meaning?
Well, and why can't it be supposed gang members who are just running drugs into the country, and that drug threat is considered warrants this kind of action?
Right. So there's a policy issue as to whether we should do something to deal with a drug invasion by foreign gangs. The issue, though, before the courts is whether this particular statute, as worded, permits the Trump administration to use this highly abridged process, this accelerated process where there's very little chance to object and remove people from the United States far more rapidly than would be possible if he were confined to the traditional mechanisms of immigration law.
Is everyone in the United States, whether they are here documented or undocumented, is everyone here subject to due process?
Everyone is subject to due process, whether you are undocumented, documented, a criminal or not a criminal. And the Supreme Court recently reaffirmed that in a case called JGG versus Trump.
And so when they say, bring this guy back, I know we're not just talking about Garcia, but when they say facilitate his return, what does that mean to you?
All right, that's a separate issue as to what facilitate means. Facilitate, the Trump administration thinks it means, well, if he happens to arrive at the Texas border, we'll give him a bus ride to a detention facility, or we'll give him a bus ride someplace. I think that's a very narrow interpretation of what facilitate means, and if this person was wrongfully deported without having due process, then I would have thought facilitate means to at least vigorously ask those in charge of the CCOT prison to bring this person back so that he can have due process, and it may turn out, after all that due process is done, that he doesn't belong here and he should be deported.
I want to go back to this facilitate word again,
Yes.
because this is a problem, and I've asked other guests this, maybe you can help me with it better.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand why, if the Supreme Court says something, and people don't understand their intention with the words used, why it cannot simply be asked of the court to redefine or explain what they mean by the word. Why is it then, now throw the Rosetta Stones out there and interpret what they meant like it's some mythical cabal?
Right. So what you're saying makes a lot of sense, but you need to think through the implications.
That's what I need you to help me do.
There's ambiguities in all sorts of language of the Supreme Court often. And if we had parties able to go back and seek clarification every time people were a little bit confused about what does reasonable mean or what in a particular injunction means, the Supreme Court would never get anything done.
But terms like reasonable would have then already been challenged long ago, and we would have that definition. So now we have the word facilitate. And since it is publicly debated what it even means, why doesn't the Supreme Court step in and say, to clarify our ruling, what we are saying is A, B, and C?
Right. So potentially they could do that. However, since the early days of the Republic, the Supreme Court has taken the position that they don't give what are called advisory opinions, that George Washington, in fact, asked the Supreme Court, hey, would you please help me out with a complicated legal issue? I'm not sure what to do. And the Supreme Court wrote him a very nice letter saying, thanks, George, but really we need to see a case before us. And so until there's a formal case before us that we've accepted certiorari or other jurisdiction on, we just don't render opinions. What it does suggest, by the way, is they, particularly when you have highly contested, hot-button issues like this, the Supreme Court maybe needs to be a little more clear about what it means. And there may be a flaw in that earlier opinion that they issued in the JGG case in that they were not explicit enough and perhaps trusted the Trump administration to take a good faith interpretation of what was said rather than the most aggressive interpretation possible, which is to provide a minimalist meaning to the term facilitate.
We want to remind you, we are speaking with University of Houston law professor Seth Chandler. You can join the conversation at 713-440-8870. So, Professor Chandler, we saw, two more federal judges, like we've been talking about. They blocked President Trump from deporting migrants under this Alien Enemies Act. Okay, is this just going to continue happening? They're going to continue putting people on the flight, and then they're going to go. What happens?
Right. So we've sort of had artillery battles, I would say, so far in this immigration debate. To me, the most important development that I've seen in the past week is Stephen Miller suggesting that the Trump administration might want to suspend the writ of habeas corpus. Mm-hmm. Okay? That's the nuclear weapon of the attack, any attack on civil liberties, because people need to understand what the writ of habeas corpus means. It's what separates us from essentially a police state in which you can be thrown in prison for any reason or no reason and have no recourse to the courts. And so when the Supreme Court told President Trump, hey, we're going to send this case down to South Texas where the aliens were located, and they have a right to use habeas corpus to challenge their detention. They can't use these other statutes that they were trying to use to get them in a more friendly jurisdiction. No, you've got to go down to conservative Texas and go through the conservative Fifth Circuit. I'm not sure anyone really appreciated that, well, technically Congress can suspend the writ of habeas corpus in certain instances. The president, according to an old Civil War case, cannot do it on his own, but Congress could do so. And so to me, yes, this is going to go up through the Fifth Circuit, and ultimately I suspect this case will get back to the Supreme Court again, particularly since there are so many of them. But we may face this interim development of the Trump administration just getting very frustrated and saying, okay, we're suspending habeas corpus.
Quick question. You talked about Garcia is entitled to due process, but by that logic, aren't both planefuls of those people that were sent to El Salvador, aren't all of them entitled to due process?
Yes, they are.
And nobody cares.
Well, I don't know that nobody cares. The judge in South Texas basically said, I'm going to treat you as a class of people. Essentially, your circumstances are very similar. It's all about what this Alien Enemies Act means. and they will get some degree of process. As for the people, in addition to Mr. Garcia, who were sent there, for the moment, it's not clear what's going to happen to them.
We're speaking with Professor Seth Chandler from the University of Houston Law Center. You're going to need to put on your headphones now because we're taking calls at 713-440-8870. Mike is on the line from West Houston. Mike, what's on your mind?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm very interested to hear the conversation so far, and especially the good professor's comments. I suggest that all of the activities that have been commented are merely a preparation and a smokescreen, because Trump has already established a record of disregard for the law as an entity. He's disregarded court orders. He's disregarded basically his own failure to be elected when 60 judges, federal, state, local, everybody declared the election 2020 to be clean. And yet Trump and company, by the tens of millions, refused to accept it. We have preliminaries.
Mike, I'm going to pause you right there because I want to make sure we have time to get an answer. And so listen on the radio and we'll get your answer. Mike is bringing up the case of, has Trump just disregarded the legal system here?
Right. So when President Trump says in an interview that he's not sure if he has a duty to uphold the Constitution, that strikes me as a rather scary comment, since fewer than 3 months ago he raised his right hand in front of the Chief Justice of the United States and swore to do just that. Every time he resists, he does have a legal theory. Many times those legal theories are struck down. Not always. Sometimes he wins. Sometimes he's got a point. The question's going to be whether there is going to come a time in which he just says, to heck with it, I'm not listening to the Supreme Court. At the moment, he has not done that yet.
Wouldn't that be a cause for impeachment?
Yes.
But they probably wouldn't impeach him.
I suppose it would depend what he did.
And the only way to police his behaviors is by Congress. The laws can say all, or the legal system, the juries, the judges can say, the judges can say all they want. The Supreme Court can say all they want, but they can only speak. The only people that can remove him from office or hold him accountable would have to be Congress, correct?
That's correct. Congress could repeal the Alien Enemies Act tomorrow if they wanted and end all of this. Congress could do many things. Ultimately, I will tell you, the power lies with the military, because one of the issues with the court system is they can issue orders, but the Supreme Court does not have an army. And so ultimately it depends on people keeping the Constitution in their heart, in their minds, when they think about what their obligations are. And if push really came to shove, it would depend on how seriously members of the military took their obligation to uphold the Constitution.
But that sends chills down my spine because he is the commander-in-chief, the president is, so he controls the military.
Up to a point, yes.
Do you have any personal concern about all of this? It sounds to me like we could be in a real pickle.
Do I have personal concern? Yes, I have personal concern. And I had chills running up and down my spine when I heard Stephen Miller suggest that he was going to suspend habeas corpus, because when you suspend it, that doesn't just apply to aliens. That applies to the three of you sitting around this table plus me, that people can be thrown in prison for no reason. Do I think he's going to do that? Honestly, no. I haven't, I guess I'm optimistic that the courts will rein him in, that he will sort of run out of string to evade, and that his frustration will be channeled. I understand his frustration at some of what President Biden did with respect to immigration, and it has made life difficult for him to have individualized hearings to deport people who in fact have no business being here and who are here illegally. But it's really in a constitutional government, you need to follow the rules, just like people always tell immigrants, do it the right way. I think that works in reverse, too. If you want to remove people, do it the right way.
To bring this to a close and take us back to the very beginning, is there a world in which you can see that the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 is being properly applied right now in these cases?
Yes, and I don't necessarily believe this, but you could take the view that it's up to the president to determine whether there's been an invasion or a predatory incursion. This is called the political question doctrine, that courts really shouldn't be reviewing this matter. There is precedent against that. There is some precedent from an old 1975 case suggesting that maybe the president does have additional authority here. So I don't think it's an open and shut case. I think so far the 3 district courts who have confronted have said, hey, this just doesn't look like an invasion to us. And we believe we have the authority to make that determination as part of our routine job of interpreting statutes.
Nice.
Seth Chandler is a Law Foundation professor of law at the University of Houston Law Center who specializes in constitutional law. Seth, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Coming up, we discuss how FDA changes are affecting small businesses. Stay with us as Hello Houston continues.
On the next Fresh Air, actor Danny McBride talks about the final season of HBO's The Righteous Gemstones and his journey from Hollywood to South Carolina, where he co-founded Rough House Pictures. He'll tell us about how he's built a unique comic empire, blending sharp satire with Southern charm. Join us.
You can listen to Fresh Air. It's coming up tonight at 8 p.m. on News 88.7.
Hi, I'm Craig Cohen, the host of Houston Matters. Join me weekday mornings at 9 or at your leisure on your podcast feed for your daily guide to the people, places, issues, and ideas that define Greater Houston. From politics to the economy, energy to the environment, healthcare to education to transportation and beyond. If it matters to Houston, it matters to us. Check us out wherever you get your podcasts or live on the air weekdays at 9 a.m. right here on News 88.7.
Support comes from Lockton, an independent insurance brokerage firm dedicated to helping businesses and their people reach their goals with strategies for employee engagement, satisfaction, and productivity. More at Lockton.com.
Support comes from Houston Public Works, with information to prevent clogged pipes, backups, and unexpected expenses, like always throwing wipes, even the ones labeled flushable, in the trash, not the toilet. More at protectourpipes.org.
Support comes from Rice University's Baker Institute, where you can hear world leaders from presidents to prime ministers right here in Houston, with access to conversations on issues affecting the world. More at bakerinstitute.org/membership.
Support comes from DePelchin Children's Center. May is National Foster Care Awareness Month, and DePelchin is celebrating the foster parents who ensure that Houston area children are part of safe and loving families. Learn more at depelchin.org.
And now back to Hello Houston. Join the conversation. Call now, 713-440-8870, or email us at talk@hellohouston.org. And now here's Ernie Manous, Celestia Sherman, and Frank Billingsley.
Well, hold on. I think we're back. And we are back again. Recently, the Food and Drug Administration announced several regulatory changes related to food and drug approval process. This includes announcing changes to claims like healthy on food packages, and the recently appointed Health and Human Services Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., says he wants to close a loophole for additives in food production. So what impact can we expect these FDA changes would have on businesses? With more is David Lennarz. He is the co-founder and president of Registrar Corp., the leading FDA compliance and regulatory company. David, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Okay, let's just start this off with, what does healthy currently mean on food packaging?
Well, that's a tricky question, because in fact it really depends on the product, and so it's very product specific as to when a company can use a claim and slap that on a label saying it's healthy or it's heart healthy. So it varies greatly based on the actual product, and so it's a complex process to actually sort through and figure out. FDA has certain claims that they have accepted and agreed that can be used based on products and ingredients. And then there are a lot of gray areas as well. And of course, that's where we see, products and companies run into trouble with FDA.
I guess my understanding also, or my confusion in this, is because advertising is held to a different set of standards than nutritional values. So in a commercial, you can say something that may not be necessarily 100% accurate, and that's allowed, where in labeling of food, there should be there are stronger regulations, correct?
Well, so on the FDA front, FDA actually considers labeling to encompass not just what is, put on the food product itself, but on the website of the company selling the product, on marketing materials.
Okay.
So FDA actually considers labeling not just the package, but anything around the product that's being out there for public consumption. Now, obviously, FCC gets involved when there are claims as well. But when it comes to actual things like healthy claims, information on the labeling around the nutrition facts charts, all of that is not only what appears on the product, but what also appears on the website. So, again, FDA will get involved when they're looking, for example, at dietary supplement companies that are saying one thing perhaps on their website, and perhaps they're saying something a little more rational or modest on the actual product itself.
Can you give me some examples of what concerns you, or what are you in favor of with these different changes we're hearing about?
Well, I think the most important thing, one idea I know that's, been put forth under the new administration with Kennedy in place is a simplification of the labeling, front of pack requirement, essentially, that would give a consumer a very simple, easy to read snapshot of key parts, key ingredients in that product. So cholesterol, fats, sugars, because ultimately the reason the US is so strict around labeling, and particularly compared to other countries, ultimately it's so a consumer can literally take two very identical products and decide which in their mind is healthier. You go down a grocery store aisle, pick up 2 bags of granola, for example, you'll see one has X amount of grams of sugar and another has Y. And these are things, again, labeling is designed, and FDA has designed the rules around this to make it transparent and very easy for a consumer to understand what they're actually going to be purchasing.
Which I find very interesting, David, because any person can go on Instagram and see how in the U.S., a side-by-side in our labeling on a box of cereal, on Fruit Loops, and we will have 15 ingredients that are extremely difficult to understand. And then you can take the exact same box of Fruit Loops and see that there are 4 or 5, ingredients, and it's wheat, flour, milk, whatever it might be. Do you think that as we're looking at the FDA, there needs to be changes around essentially, we are calling it transparency, but is it really transparent?
Well, I think what you're really identifying is the fact that in the United States, we all consume or, are available to consume a just massive amount of products that are highly processed foods. And you've heard the new commissioner of FDA and Robert Kennedy talking about this, and the fact that there are so many ingredients in food products that, to your point, you can look at a package and literally say, I have no idea, what half these ingredients actually do. The issue around these is that for years, FDA has had a system in place for approval of ingredients called generally recognized as safe. And these have and the system as it currently exists is through self-affirmation, where the food ingredient manufacturers actually affirm that their products, their ingredients are safe. and these then are used to manufacture various food products. So there is a move under the current administration to change that process and actually require scientific review of these various ingredients.
To go back to Celeste's example, though, isn't one of the differences also what is allowed to be in our products in the U.S. as compared to what's allowed to be in products over in Europe?
Yeah, certainly there is that aspect as well. I think we all are aware, in general, Europe has much stricter regulations around what can and cannot be in food products. For example, in the United States, the seafood industry, the meat, poultry industry will use ingredients like tripolyphosphate. Tripolyphosphate, which, by the way, the majority of is imported from China, which also gets, of course, to cost of food products with tariffs out there. The tripolyphosphate is used as an ingredient to add moisture, a preservative. It also adds water weight to the product. In Europe, those aren't, the tripolyphosphate isn't allowed in most products. So there are absolutely some differences, between countries as well.
If these proposed changes and this redefining healthy and the additives in food and all of that, those changes happen, how is that going to have an impact on business in this country, do you think?
Yeah, it'll have a big impact in that, companies that are manufacturing a processed food product in particular, with the elimination, for example, of recently announced elimination of petroleum-based synthetic dyes that are used in many of the foods we consume, companies will have to reformulate. And essentially that requires finding new suppliers, new sources. And of course, it also requires finding substitutes that are then permitted. So you may have heard recently announcements around authorizing some new natural colorants out there, a blue color, a couple different blues, a white color. And the idea ultimately is these will replace some of these synthetic colors. So food companies will have to adapt by changing their ingredients. They have to reformulate products. They'll have to relabel products. So this isn't something that company can just change overnight, particularly if they're a significant manufacturer producing large volumes of foods with these ingredients in them. Now there is time for them to do this. The administration has said, end of 2026 to phase these out. So again, but these things take time, and this is what food scientists do. They reformulate and come up with these products with the different ingredients, but it takes time and then sourcing those supplies as well.
Now, you just talked about the implications that these changes could have on businesses, but what kind of implications could this have on Americans' health?
Well, that's the big question, right? The assumption is that many of these ingredients can contribute to various health issues. The real question is the science around this. Is this truly have these been truly proven to be detrimental to the health, health of Americans? I think the area where there's no question more is around saturated fats and sugars. Where it gets a little trickier is around these ingredients like the food colorants. That's less science around that.
And who's going to pay for all of this? This
Hopefully
relabeling and this
big...
ultimately you're the one that's going to pay for it.
Yeah, I guess I would. My last question to you would be: is this the moment to be doing it when right now we are facing what looks like at least inflated prices, potential problems with tariffs, to all of a sudden be then limiting what we're currently using in these foods and these companies having to find something new, which more than likely will be more expensive? Seems like a difficult, perfect storm we're heading into.
Yeah, not unlike lots of other industries, tariffs impact the food industry in a tremendous way.
Thank you, David. We appreciate you being on our show.
60% of our spices are imported. 70% of the seafood we consume is imported. So the industry is definitely under attack on the tariff front, and then any reformulation, as you say, ultimately that impacts the consumer at the cash register.
Thank you. Got to run.
Thank you, David Lennarz is the co-founder and president of Register Corp. And that brings us to the end of our show. We want to thank you for listening, watching, commenting on Hello Houston. We'll be back tomorrow with more conversations. This is News 88.7.
Thanks for listening to Hello Houston. Join us every Monday through Friday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. to talk all things Houston. The Hello Houston production team includes Garrett Bowman, William Menjivar, Jen Altide, Todd Holslander, and Jim Kovacic. For the latest in local news, subscribe to the Hello Houston daily newsletter at HoustonPublicMedia.org. Hello Houston is a production of Houston Public Media. The opinions expressed by the guests of this program are solely their own and do not represent the views of management, staff, or underwriters of Houston Public Media. This is News 88.7.
This is News 88.7 KUHF Houston, a service of the University of Houston. It's 1 o'clock.
Funding for Here and Now comes from MathWorks, creator of MATLAB and Simulink software, accelerating the pace of engineering and science. Learn more at mathworks.com.
From NPR and WBUR Boston, I'm Asma Khalid.
And I'm Peter O'Dowd. It's Here and Now. Coming up, President Trump heads to the Middle East for his first big international trip of his second term. Will he accept a $400 million jet from Qatar to serve as Air Force One?
It's completely unprecedented. The only thing that I can think of in our history would be the gift of the Statue of Liberty from France.
Also, new research points to the chilling risks that AI chatbots can pose to children. We have tips on how to protect your kids.
And an American nun shares her hopes for women in the Catholic Church after the election of Pope Leo.
When you think about it, that women could have this role of service in the church, that's what I would like to see.
Coming up, Here and Now.
But first, the news.
Live from NPR News, I'm Lakshmi Singh. Under the Trump administration, the United States is welcoming the arrival of dozens of immigrants who have been granted refugee status. White